Sitting back and poking at enemies with Polaris is getting pretty boring in Grandmasters. And since this season is extremely long, I have the perfect build for those that want to feel the adrenaline rushing through their veins. I am talking about tanking Tormentor bosses while your teammates safely hit that annoying crit spot on their chest. Standing in front of hordes of enemies and the final boss while your teammates have a coffee break at the back. I mean, you don't even need the cheese spot to survive in Lake of Shadows because you are the cheese. Wherever you go with this build, you are the king of that place, and that's what playing a Titan should really feel like. But this build isn't just about tanking because it also melts Grandmaster champions with its damage. I mean, it only takes one Lament combo to kill them. Which is insane because in comparison, a God Roll Apex Predator instead takes 2 to 3 rockets to kill the same champion. Now, in order to achieve this tankiness, we are going to be using the exotic Strongholds. This exotic does a lot of things, so bear with me. First off, it maximizes the guard stat on any sword. This means that it basically provides any sword with 100 guard resistance and 100 guard endurance. To top that off, you also don't consume any sword energy when guarding shots, so you can hold your guard infinitely. Strongholds also provide you with 50% damage resistance when you have your guard active. This stacks with the damage resistance provided by the sword guard itself, which in our case it's 95%. Do keep in mind that a sword guards in a shape of an arc, meaning that attacks from behind as well as some AoE attacks will still hit you. For example, this boss started shooting behind me, and because there was a wall right there, his attacks started to hit me in my weak spot, and if it wasn't for the 50% damage resistance from Strongholds, I would have easily died. When guarding attacks, you also accumulate stacks of Perfect Guard, which can go all the way to 100 stacks. These stacks get expended once you attack an enemy with the sword, and give you restoration times 2 depending on how many stacks you had, with 16 seconds being the maximum at 100 stacks. The beauty about this is that the stacks last for 10 seconds even after you switch to a different weapon, meaning that you can stack up your guard, then switch to a blinding GL, shoot it and walk up to enemies to attack them with a sword. Strongholds by themselves are easily a top tier exotic in Destiny. However, it gets even crazier when we pair them up with the Strand subclass, because now we also have Banner of War, which creates a glowing aura around you that heals you and your allies, as well as it increases melee damage by 40%, glaive damage by 25%, and sword damage by 10%. This can also be combined with Woven Mail for an extra 45% damage reduction, which we can either activate by picking up an Orb of Power with Thread of Warding, or by breaking a Tangle with Into the Fray. All of this combined with Strongholds gets you to 99% damage reduction with Restoration times 2 and Banner of War ticking. I mean, you simply cannot die if you manage to activate all buffs, which is not that hard because they all last a good while. Lastly, we can't forget about Lament because this sword in itself is one of my favorite weapons in the game. There is no right or wrong combo with Lament because each combo has its purpose with different outcomes. For example, if you want the highest total damage in a limited amount of time, then go for 3 to 4 light attacks into a heavy. This is almost guaranteed to kill a champion, and it's useful when facing champions that you know you will only be able to do one combo against. If you want a faster combo with a high burst, then simply go for 2 light attacks into a heavy. This will leave a champion finishable instead. Alright, let's get into the actual aspects, fragments and mods, and later I will explain to you guys exactly the rotation that you want to follow in order to survive and play this build efficiently. In the artifact, make sure that you pick up Kindling Trigger, Flint Striker, and Rays of Precision. Stat-wise, you want to go for 100 Resilience, followed by Recovery and Discipline. Aspect-wise, make sure that you pick Banner of War, and then Into the Fray. For our fragments, we are using Thread of Warding for the Woven Mail, Thread of Continuity, that way we can have a longer Sever and a longer Suspend from our grenade. Thread of Generation so we can spam our grenade more often, And lastly, Thread of Transmutation, so we can have an easier time making tangles. Mod-wise, you want to be using Heavy Ammo Finder with a Heavy Ammo Scout. This in combination with Solar Siphon, so we can make Orbs of Power with our solar weapons. On our gauntlets, we are using Bolstering Detonation with Impact Induction and then Momentum Transfer. If you have the space, you can also use something like Font of Focus. The mods on our chest are extremely important, so make sure that you're using melee damage resistant with Concussive Dampener, and then the third mod, make sure that you adapt it to whatever activity that you're doing. For example, if you're doing Hypernet, you want to be using an arc resistance. If you're doing Lake of Shadows, then either use a solar or an arc resistance. On our leg armor, we are using triple solar weapon surges so we can maximize the damage that we deal with Lament, as well as our solar weapon of choice. If you're worried about ammo, then you can also switch one of them out for a solar scavenger. Lastly, on our Titan mark, we are using 1 copy of Time Dilation, with 1 copy of Reaper, followed by Proximity Ward to make sure that we don't die mid-finisher. Weapon-wise, I love using a Lingering Dread with Disorienting Grenades and Chill Clip because this allows you to play so much more aggressive and it also deals with overloads. I usually combine this with a solar weapon, in this case Tyranny of Heaven, because this provides you excellent range, that way you can also be useful from a distance. Finally, we are obviously going to be using Lament because it is one of the best swords in the entire game. However, don't be afraid to experiment with different loadouts because you can pretty much use any sword in the game with this build. The best way to start your rotation is to always have some stacks of perfect guard ready, because remember that they only disappear after 10 seconds of not blocking any damage. After that, you want to throw down your grenade. Just make sure that you don't do it while getting shot by all the enemies, because it literally only takes half of a second of not blocking for you to die in harder content. Once the enemies are suspended, you can safely go in and swing at them. This will create a tangle which, when broken, will give you woven mail. Now you have every single possible buff active, practically making you immortal even in Grandmasters. You can also do the exact same thing, but with a blinding grenade launcher instead of the suspending grenade. Just make sure that somewhere along the way you pick up an Orb of Power, so you can get woven mail and then spawn more tangles with it. I find the mod Reaper an easy way to make an Orb of Power even when there's only one enemy left. However, feel free to experiment with Reaper and replace it if you don't make much use of it. Knowing when to go in is by far the most important skill that you want to learn with this build. This comes with trial and error, but the rule of thumb is to never stop blocking with your sword unless you have Woven Mail, Banner of War and Restoration procced at the same time. Especially if we are talking about Grandmasters. If you ever encounter Threshers, make sure that you don't try blocking their shots. Just trust me on this one. If you like using blinding gels, like I do, then these can really give you a lot more opportunities to go in and enjoy the build more. If you have one with Chill Clip, you can also use it to stun overload champions. Pop your super whenever you see a lot of ads and champions spawning and you simply want to get rid of them fast. You can also use it on bosses since it actually deals a pretty good amount of damage. And that is all for today's video. If you have any questions, then ask me anything on my stream or Discord server. As always, I hope that you enjoyed this build and have a wonderful rest of your day.